Good morning. This is Jim Gallagher. I'm Executive Director of the New York State Smart Grid Consortium, and I'd like to welcome you to this special webinar on the topic of microgrids. This webinar is co-sponsored by the consortium and also the New York Rising Community Reconstruction Program. This is a topic that there's great interest in lately, and primarily because it's been recognized that community-based microgrids, when they're properly designed, have the potential to protect people, businesses, and other infrastructure from extended power outages. We've seen that some examples of microgrids weathering storms such as Superstorm Sandy, Hurricane Irene, and Tropical Storm Lee. The Smart Grid Consortium, just for those who are unfamiliar with it, it's a nonprofit organization comprised of several of the state's power companies, universities, research organizations, and energy policymakers, and it's dedicated to modernizing the state's power grid. We aim at the consortium to be a resource for local governments and communities that are interested in exploring innovative power solutions such as microgrids and other smart grid opportunities. And we will be doing things such as this webinar, but also we encourage you to visit the consortium webpage at www.nysmartgrid.com, and we will post that later in the webinar. We will also be working to make sure that on the webpage we will continuously update it with useful information on the topic of microgrids and other information to be helpful to communities as they consider these options. Today's webinar is designed to provide an introduction to the topic of microgrids, what they are, how communities can go about identifying whether they might benefit from them. The webinar, we're going to have several expert presentations. We will then open the webinar up to questions, and in fact, you'll have the opportunity to submit questions in writing as the presentations proceed. Those questions will be sent to me, forward to me, and then I will distribute it to the appropriate speaker. Another important point, this webinar will be archived, so within a few days we will have it posted on the consortium webpage. So you'll be able to go to the microgrid section and you'll be able to listen to the webinar in its entirety. With that, I'd like to get started, and I want to first turn it over to Carol Garcia, who is the State Energy Liaison to the Governor's Office of Storm Recovery. Carol?
Thank you, Jim. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on community microgrids. First, I'd like to acknowledge and thank all those who've made this presentation possible, in particular, Jim Gallagher of the Smart Grid Consortium, Tom Bourgeois of the Pace Energy and Climate Center, Mark Torpy from the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, and Brian Morrison of Industrial Economics. So, why are we here today? You, the New York Rising communities, have in your conceptual plans and list of strategies indicated your keen interest in exploring the use of microgrids in your rebuilding and recovery efforts. As you work toward identifying your priority projects and completing your plans by March 31st, we thought this webinar could help you in the development and refinement of those strategies. Microgrids can be very beneficial to a community, as Jim mentioned. In order to determine that, there's information you need to know about them and their application, which can help you in your decision-making process. Our hope is that today's presentation will give you that information and also guide you to other resources to help you formulate and inform your final plans. Please don't be shy, ask questions, and that's why we've convened these experts today. Our moderator is Jim Gallagher, the Executive Director of the Smart Grid Consortium. Jim has over 30 years of energy policy experience. Jim and the consortium are at the forefront of smart grid development in New York State. He will introduce each of our speakers and moderate the question and answer period. We also have on hand some subject matter experts who are on the call to help answer your questions. I'd like to now hand this back to Jim Gallagher, our moderator.
Okay, our Our first speaker today will be Tom Bourgeois, and he's with the Pace University Energy and Climate Center. And what Tom's going to do is provide an overview of community-based microgrids and important factors that communities should keep in mind when thinking about whether they make sense for them. Tom's presentation will be approximately 20 minutes. Okay, Tom.
Thank you very much, Jim, and thank you for the opportunity to participate here in today's webinar. As Jim said, I'm going to cover an overview, an introduction to community microgrids in New York, and much of this material is up in more detail, I believe, both at Jim's website as well as our community energy site at PACE, which is provided at the end of the last slide. Well, I'm sorry. So what I'm hoping to cover here today is to take a look at what are microgrids and how do they contribute to energy resiliency. We're going to cover what technologies can be used in a microgrid and how they can provide environmentally superior and cost-effective power. Spend some time on the roadmap to developing a community microgrid, what types of studies, financing decisions, and potential regulatory challenges will need to be addressed. And finally, spend a little bit of time talking about tools and resources that are available to communities to assist in the microgrid development process. Microgrids combine a variety of different technologies to serve various types of energy users. This is just a representative, this is just a emblematic of what one might put together. It could be police and emergency operations centers or centers of refuge, but for these purposes, we have a couple of complexes indicating that they're in close proximity, a hospital, perhaps a retirement home or a senior center, a multifamily housing complex, and perhaps a supermarket, again indicating that these are all in fairly close proximity to each other. Now, the first thing to be done would be to look at the energy efficiency of all of these buildings before anything else is done, and we indicate that here with the yellow, doing energy efficiency at a couple of sites, making sure that all cost-effective energy efficiency has been done. But once that's done, a combined heat and power system or an on-site power system providing power and thermal energy, hot water, heating, and perhaps cooling, all from a single source, can be utilized. And in this instance, again, just as a representative example, we're looking at a hospital that has a combined heat and power on-site generation facility, and that might perhaps be tied to a senior center or a retirement home, which may also serve as a refuge center or a center for vulnerable populations. And again, the combined heat and power would be an on-site generator where the waste heat from electric generation is being utilized in some productive way for providing space heating, hot water, or cooling in the summer months. Another step involved in microgrids is perhaps incorporating, along with the energy efficiency and the combined heat and power, incorporating distributed renewable energy. Once again, in this case, we're indicating that perhaps photovoltaics, PV, or small wind, or some source of biomass or locally, again, being in close proximity to these buildings, because that's an important concept. The generation in the buildings are generally in quite close proximity. That can be utilized here as well. So you could tie in renewable energy along with perhaps gas-based combined heat and power, or in some circumstances maybe biomass-based, and as noted before, the energy efficiency always comes first. And then one might look at a larger suite. We see this as an opportunity to think broadly about a whole portfolio or a suite of resources. Microgrids might contain energy storage, renewable energy, hybrid systems that also include smart energy, intelligent energy management, controls, and other means of balancing the generation and the demands within your microgrid, and perhaps allowing you to do demand response and provide other functions. So once again, we encourage communities to think broadly, to combine, develop a hybrid system, or look at the potential for a hybrid system that might include all of these elements where that makes sense, where it's feasible, again, including storage, including smart controls, as well as local on-site generation and energy efficiency. So to summarize, a representative menu of microgrid technologies might include first and foremostly whole building energy efficiency, employed before sizing the generation to make sure that in your microgrid, in these buildings, that the generation is right-sized. You do cost-effective energy efficiency first. You may have an opportunity for renewable energy, whether that be photovoltaic, solar thermal, small wind, hydro, biomass, geothermal. There may be opportunities to be investigated in that regard. Combined heat and power, CHP, district heating and cooling systems, are often the centerpiece of these microgrids. They can, in some circumstances, provide cost-effective energy savings. And then storage technologies, intelligent energy management devices, and as noted before, smart grid technologies to manage the interface with the utility and the flows between this grid and the distribution system. I'd like to speak a couple of minutes about CHP because it is often the centerpiece of a reliable, clean, and economic microgrid. Combined heat and power, when properly designed and configured, would operate pretty much continuously. It would efficiently provide electrical and thermal energy efficiency 70, 75%, and in some cases over 80%, depending on the circumstances. And it's been proven to provide resilient power through storms, blackouts, and other emergencies. I'm going to show some examples of that occurred during some of the recent storm events here. And I'd also like to indicate that the prices in New York can make these microgrid projects a bit more economical. We have a little chart here that shows that in terms of CHP nationwide, New York ranks second over the last 5-year period in terms of new installations. So there is a lot of CHP being investigated and being built in New York State, and NYSERDA in New York State has long championed well-designed, thoughtfully constructed CHP systems. In terms of CHP versus backup generation, one of the things that we've seen from the storms is oftentimes critical facilities, well, not oftentimes, in most instances, critical facilities will have emergency generators, but those emergency generators don't always perform as prescribed. And we found, there's a record in some cases of the emergency generators starting but stopping after a couple hours, or some not starting at all. So these storms have to some extent shown that that reliance on emergency generators may not fully reduce the risks that critical infrastructure faces during emergency or storm events. CHP, on the other hand, tends to perform better. It's designed and maintained to run continuously. The natural gas infrastructure typically is not impacted by severe weather. That's not true in all cases, but it tends to be more resilient. And CHP that's run every day, that's maintained and operated for economic reasons, tends to have a higher availability. So in terms of comparison between the CHP and the emergency generators, although obviously there's still a need, the CHP can give an extra level, an added level of reliability during storm events. Just a little bit of background in terms of the costs of resiliency, and Brian will get into this a little bit more. Moody's Analytics estimated that there was nearly $20 billion in losses occurred in New York due to suspended business activities after Superstorm Sandy. The new Plan YC resiliency report cited $19 billion in total losses. The 2100 Commission report called for, that came out shortly after Superstorm Sandy, and as a consequence, in part, called for accelerating the pace of DG microgrids as a component of future resiliency planning. Microgrids are as Carol and Jim noted, becoming increasingly drawing attention of communities and policymakers alike. They're a component of Governor Cuomo's storm preparedness plan, which pledges $40 million for several microgrid projects through the NYPrize initiative. And again, on-site generation, properly configured and operated and maintained, can certainly serve the needs of communities when the larger grid is down. I'd like to offer some examples we have from around New York State to further amplify this point. We have South Oaks Hospital, which is a hospital and nursing home campus. When the grid around South Oaks went down, they went into island mode. They operated disconnected from the Microgrid for 15 days. The CHP system provided the facility's electricity, thermal, and hot water demands for a 15-day period. And in addition to meeting the hospital's needs, South Oaks was able to admit evacuated patients from nearby facilities. They were able to refrigerate medications and housed some hospital staff who had lost power. Another example of a community microgrid is Co-op City in the Bronx. It's one of the largest cooperative housing units in the world, 35 residential buildings and over 55,000 residents. They have a 38 megawatt CHP system, utility savings estimated at about $15 million per year, and the CHP facility provided power to Co-op City before, during, and after Superstorm Sandy. So again, the benefits, it may lower energy costs, and we do want to qualify that. We can find several instances where there are cost savings. There's a microgrid in Utica, the Burstone, which ties to St. Luke's Hospital, Utica College, and a nearby nursing home. Together, these three complexes report saving between $300,000 and $500,000 annually, or a 15 to 20% bill savings, and about a 10-year payback period for their microgrid system. Cornell University has a showcase system, microgrid district energy system, CHP, with about an 8 to 10% return on investments for energy savings and significant greenhouse gas reductions and reliability benefits. I mentioned South Oaks Hospital. The FDA's White Oak microgrid project is expected to save $11 million a year. And again, just to note though, but from site to site, microgrids may impose more costs, but in many instances, or in instances where it's designed to do so, this will also markedly improve power reliability that can help justify this increased investment. Other benefits from microgrids include reduced emissions. Many sites use these as an opportunity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. For example, Cornell estimates 50,000 tons per year of CO2 reductions. The project that I mentioned in Utica estimates about 4,000 tons per year of CO2. The NYU microgrid estimates 44,000 tons per year. NYU's microgrid is part of their long-term climate action plan, and about 60+% of the greenhouse gas savings in the first 10 years of the plan, almost 5/8 of it are attributable to this one investment. UMass Medical Center achieved a 19% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions, and again, I had mentioned the South Oaks Hospital. They reduced their carbon emissions by 1,900 tons per year, and their NOx was reduced 95%, removing the hospital from the Title V or major source category. So what are some of the steps that we see involved? The community microgrid roadmap that we suggest would include beginning with setting your project goals, organize and educating core stakeholders, identifying project sites, conducting a first-level screening, then conducting a more detailed, once you've identified sites that are technically feasible and economically viable, doing a more detailed screening and audit grade study, acquiring financing, and then finally acquiring necessary approvals. The energy planning process helps ensure the community's plan for whatever their energy needs will be in the future. An important factor here is to find an anchor energy user. That may be a hospital, it may be a university campus, convention center, could be an industrial park, a municipal center, but some anchor users that can help provide access to capital as well as to ensure and secure the load. And also, it's important to try to identify sites with substantial wasted energy. This will, if you can find sites with opportunities to recover wasted energy, that can certainly help improve the economics of your project. We give an example here of Bridgeport, where they're capturing previously wasted energy from a nearby generating plant and utilizing that for thermal energy purposes in downtown Bridgeport, Connecticut. Again, finding the right site, looking for users that have complementary electric and thermal demands. For the CHP, if you have on-site generation with CHP, you want to make sure that at the same time the electricity is being generated, that there's enough thermal demand to be utilizing that waste heat. So a coincidence between the electric and thermal demands is quite important. This is addressed in those screening studies that I alluded to earlier. Beginning the first level of screening, I note here I'm also a representative of the U.S. Department of Energy. We run the Northeast CHP Center, and we have some limited availability to offer these feasibility analysis. It's an early stage screening, a first level screening that identifies whether a site is worthy of a deeper look. And then once you've identified sites that seem to make sense, again, sites that are economically viable and technically feasible, you would take a more in-depth look. You would look at the technical and financial aspects of the project. You do a more precise analysis of the financing, and you'd look much more closely at the simultaneity of electric and thermal demands. You'd be looking at least the hour-by-hour electric and thermal loads. Along the path, of course, a very important component is the financing. There are a variety of opportunities to assist communities. For example, each locality in the New York Rising Community Reconstruction Program is eligible for between $3 million and $25 million of CDBG disaster recovery funds for rebuilding more resilient communities. Governor Cuomo's Community Grid NYPrize Commission will offer $40 million to develop microgrids in 2014. NYSERDA, as I had mentioned, New York State and NYSERDA have long been champions for CHP, and they run a very attractive incentive program for combined heat and power, among the most attractive in the nation. There are other alternatives for municipal or nonprofits. Tax-exempt bond financing may be available. There's a variety of different financing and third-party service models. There's also some state incentives, and our center has a lot of information about incentives, various forms of financing that I'm happy to talk to others about later on. But for sites that don't have the capital, you may be able to raise it through a third party. There are a number of models where a third party will come in and invest, and then the user will pay over time based on energy use and savings over time. This is, again, just an example. There are various forms of ownership of these community microgrids. We've been looking around the country, at New York and around the country, at different forms this might take, and this is not to say that these are the only forms, but this is just examples or prototypes, templates. Utilities can own the distribution infrastructure in a microgrid, and in some cases, potentially the generation. There are some examples of the utilities owning and operating generation that might supply this level of reliability. We oftentimes see a single energy user, a large campus is the case that we see most often, like Cornell or NYU, that install these large systems, or elsewhere, Princeton and some of the others I mentioned, UMass. You may have a group of unrelated users, 2, 3, 4 buildings in close proximity that are contractually bound to each other and collectively own the microgrid assets. There may be a single owner that can serve power to tenants. For example, perhaps it might be the case of an industrial park where the tenants or those involved in the industrial park are taking power and heat, thermal energy, cooling perhaps from a single owner. Or there may be an independent provider that can own the microgrid and provide power to one or several energy users. So, for example, the Burstone project in Utica, which connects St. Luke's Hospital, Utica College, in a next-door nursing home. So what does a microgrid cost? Well, this varies quite a bit. Cost estimates vary greatly. It depends a lot on the location. It depends on your existing infrastructure, how much of the infrastructure can be reutilized or how much of that infrastructure has to be retrofitted. Those can all have a substantial impact on the total costs. What are the types of loads that are being served? What are the types of technologies that you're installing? Are you using gas combustion turbines or reciprocating engines, or you're using solar, or will there be storage? So it depends greatly on the local circumstances, but we took a look at and found examples that tended to be in a range as wide as $3 million to $9 million per megawatt, or $3,000 to $9,000 per kW. And again, these costs, there will be additional costs for the additional level of reliability, and so one might want to factor that into the equation as well. So for example, on the lower end here, we have in Hartford, Connecticut, a proposal to site a 600 kW generator at a cost of just under $3 million, which includes all the studies and the distribution and investment. The case of the Utica College, St. Luke's Hospital, was about a $16.3 million project. And then on the large end, we have the Cornell project, which ranged from 135 to 138, and it's about a 38 megawatt project at Cornell. In terms of the timeline, once again, microgrid development can vary greatly in development time. We've been looking at, in Connecticut, there's been a microgrid pilot program in operations for a year, and 9 sites were selected. We took one representative site here. Again, this is just one representative site, the Hartford Park. It's called the Parkville Cluster site. And this was a projected 18-month development time. But once again, I think we have to caveat the fact that these timelines may have been a little bit aggressive, and whether or not they can make it in the allotted time is still up for determination, because these projects right now are just in the process of being designed and built. But this is one representative timeline that we found from a pilot microgrid project that won approval in Connecticut last year. So to wrap up, in terms of regulatory matters, what approvals might be required, qualifying facility status to exempt the project from public utility regulation may be requested from the New York State Public Service Commission. Franchise or lesser consent may be requested from the municipal governments, particularly if the project is going to tie buildings that cross rights of way. There will be building-related approvals, including permits, zoning variances, excavation, engineering, and so on. And then finally, there will, with generation on site, for example, gas generation, combustion turbines or engines, there will be air permitting issues as well. I just wanted to note here that, as I said, I do represent the U.S. DOE's Northeast CHP Center, as well as the Pace University Center. I want to direct you to the bottom bullet, technical assistance. We can provide some limited technical assistance to end users who are looking at CHP, microgrids, or district systems. We can assist in that initial first-level screening that I was describing, where you can ascertain which sites might be most feasible. And I'm sorry, with that, I'll turn it back to Jim.
Thank you, Tom. Let me just mention to everyone listening that just a reminder that if you have questions, feel free to submit them and we'll address them at the end. I have received a few questions that I will be asking the speakers to address at the end of the presentations. I want to introduce our next two speakers at the same time. It's, first of all, Mark Torpy. He is Director of Research and Development with the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, and also Brian Morrison with Industrial Economics, Inc., which is a consulting firm working with NYSERDA. I just want to point out that NYSERDA in particular is a founding member of the consortium, and Mark in particular was very involved from the early days of the consortium's work within New York. What Mark and Brian are going to focus on will be microgrid issues from a state agency perspective. Mark will highlight some important new initiatives that are either underway or soon will be, and Brian in particular will focus on important benefit cost considerations, again, from a state agency perspective. With that, let me turn it over to you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. What I'd like to do is provide a little update on a mission-critical microgrid study that we're involved in now. NYSERDA, as well as the Department of Public Service and the Department of Homeland Security are working together. At this point, we are evaluating 5 sites across the state that have a clustering of mission-critical facilities. Let me give you an idea of where those sites are that could be of interest to folks on the phone. We've got one project that we're looking at with Metropolitan Hospital as sort of the center of the cluster in New York City. A second project we're looking at in Binghamton, in the Binghamton area, specifically at the Broome County Public Safety Facility in that location. Another project in Nassau County at the Cedar Creek Water Pollution Control Plant. Fourth project in Suffolk County at a Yaphank complex that has a clustering of fire rescue, police, sheriff facilities, and such. And then the fifth location is in Rockland County in New City, where we're looking at clustering the county jail and the county office building. And when I mean, I talk about clustering, sort of, we're looking at areas where there's physical proximity of these assets so that if we're thinking about tethering them together and connecting them, they're not so far away as to be, economically difficult to pull off. So that's kind of the screening tool that we provided to help select the best sites. At this point, we're developing high-level, what I would call conceptual designs for these locations. We are gathering load data and looking at different DG options. CHP, obviously one type of option that we are giving strong consideration to throughout these sites, as well as PV and energy storage that Tom talked about earlier. We are working with General Electric, EPRI, and also Pace University and Industrial Economics on the project. And one of the interesting things that I think will be very valuable to folks on the phone is we are developing a cost-benefit analysis tool that will help us identify, the cost side of these microgrids as well as the benefits, to get a better handle on all of those benefits that would accrue for a given project. And Brian Morrison will get into that cost-benefit analysis tool in the subsequent presentation, but that should be, I think, something of value to all folks on the phone. The final report for this activity is due in April, so that information will be made available to all those on the phone, and we'll share that data with you when it's out. One other item I'd like to talk about is the NYPrize competition. We are working, NYSERDA is working with DPS, the Department of Public Service, and also the New York Power Authority and the Governor's Office to develop a NYPrize competition. And we are really interested in identifying the best sites, really across New York State for a very comprehensive community grid. So this is really more than just, it's not a microgrid for mission-critical facilities. We're really trying to look at, the best projects that provide value for the electric utilities and a whole variety of end-use consumers. So residential, benefits, commercial and industrial benefits as well to those consumers. So we're really looking at a fairly broad type of community grid to support with this prize. We want to provide consumers with the greatest choices of DG assets and also load modulating ability, the ability to flexibly move load up and down and empower customers to be able to do that in an effective, cost-effective manner. We are looking for projects that can support or can operate for extended periods of time during grid outage, but also importantly, provide value during normal utility operations. So we really would like to sort of cherry pick, if you will, through the prize, sites that have a tremendous amount of value both during emergencies and normal operations. We are currently developing the evaluation criteria to help us identify the best projects, and we will be completing that shortly. Again, more information to follow. NYSERDA will issue an RFP here to get the competition going, but at this point, we will get more information to you as it becomes available. But we're very, very excited about this opportunity, and we would love to see any projects that you may have, thought about or have in the works compete for this opportunity. So thank you very much, and with that, I will turn it over to Brian Morrison to talk a little bit more about the cost-benefit analysis tool that he's been developing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Appreciate the participation of everyone here today. I want to thank everyone for organizing this, particularly Jim and Carol. As Mark has indicated, we are involved in a project with NYSERDA, also the Department of Public Service, and the state's Division of Homeland Security to look at the potential for microgrids to support delivery of what we term critical services, public health and safety services during extended power outages. And as the previous speakers have indicated, a lot of the interest in microgrids is really driven by the potential for them to provide that kind of support in response to power outages that might occur in situations similar to those that have occurred in New York State during some recent storm events such as Sandy or Tropical Storm Lee or Hurricane Irene. My role is specifically to evaluate the costs and benefits of developing microgrids in the 5 communities that Mark mentioned, and we'll be looking at that from the standpoint of both costs and benefits in grid-connected and in islanded mode. The perspective that we'll take on the analysis will be the costs and benefits of these projects to the state as a whole. But some of the, certainly a great deal, in fact, of the costs and the benefits we'll be looking at will be costs and benefits that accrue to the community that is being served by the project. So this may be helpful to folks thinking about the costs and benefits to their own community as well as from a broader public policy perspective. With respect to elements of the cost analysis, we will attempt to recognize all costs associated with the development of a microgrid, and those would be costs that would be incurred by the developer itself or perhaps by others outside the microgrid. Planning and administration is one area that needs to be taken into account, and that would include things like costs associated with the design of the project, also site permitting costs, and any costs that would be associated with negotiating arrangements with the local utility for, say, standby services or for the sale of energy if the microgrid will actually be selling energy back to the local utility. Another major cost element would be the capital investments associated with the project, and that includes both the purchase and the installation of the infrastructure for power generation and for energy storage, and also energy distribution equipment. In addition, we would take into account in our analysis the cost of upgrades to the conventional grid that would be necessary to accommodate connection of the microgrid, and that's what we refer to when we indicate costs associated with interconnection to the grid. Another major cost element will be operation and maintenance, or O&M costs. And the major categories there will be labor associated with operating the microgrid, monitoring it, and maintaining the system. Costs of fuel, particularly fuel for conventional power generation sources, and also other materials like coolants and filters that will be necessary to operate and maintain the system. In addition, because we're taking a broad perspective on the cost-benefit analysis, we'll be looking at environmental costs. Some of those costs will be costs that will be borne by the microgrid developer, such as the costs associated with installing and operating emission control units. In addition, we'll be looking at the costs associated with the purchase of any emission allowances that might be required, for example, for emissions of sulfur dioxide or nitrous oxides, and in New York State, potentially also carbon dioxide. And we will be evaluating any environmental or health costs associated with emissions from the microgrid. On the benefits side of the equation, there are a number of major categories that will be included in our analysis. Chief among those will be, first of all, the potential energy cost savings. Those might be derived, for example, from the use of renewable distributed energy resources or from efficiencies realized in the use of combined heat and power systems. That might also include, for example, energy cost savings associated with reduction in transmission losses in the delivery of electricity to the facilities that are served by the microgrid. There may also be some capacity cost savings associated with development of a microgrid if, for example, the development of the project would reduce the peak load demand or defer potential future investments in providing peak capacity for the conventional grid as a whole. There's a potential for power quality benefits, such as reductions in the frequency or severity of voltage sags or swells, and we would look at the benefits from the standpoint of users who are particularly sensitive to those sorts of power quality events. There are environmental benefits, very much parallel to the environmental costs that I alluded to earlier. But what's really likely to drive the costs and benefits of the projects that we will be examining will be reliability benefits, and specifically losses or damages avoided as a result of reductions in exposure to power outages. We anticipate that those benefits are going to depend significantly on what are unpredictable, uncertain events. It's difficult to anticipate the frequency and severity of extended power outages. We will be examining the costs and benefits of the project specifically by taking into account a variety of alternative assumptions concerning the frequency and duration of sustained power outages. That type of analysis is going to be very important in ultimately developing recommendations to the legislature with respect to potential future investments in the development of microgrids. Mark has already spoken briefly about the overall project timeline. We started in the spring of the past year, recently completed development of the methodology for the benefit cost assessment, and as Mark indicated, the design of the potential microgrids at the 5 communities that are participating in the project is now underway. GE is putting together estimates of costs that will ultimately feed into the cost-benefit analysis, and we will be incorporating that into the model that we are developing for evaluation of the benefits and costs of each project. Hope to have this all wrapped up in the spring of this year, and the report will be available at that time. With that, I will turn it back to Jim, and Jim can open this up for Q&A.
Okay, thank you very much, Brian, and also thank you, Mark. We have received a number of questions that I'm just going to jump to immediately, and the first one came in for Tom Bourgeois. Tom, during your presentation, several times you used the term close proximity when you were discussing combined heat and power systems in close proximity to loads, or you discuss microgrids with customers that are in close proximity. What distance are you considering close proximity to be?
Well, based on one of the analyses we're doing is we're taking a look at existing microgrids and also proposals that came through the Connecticut municipal pilot, and that figure tends to be around a half mile from the central generator to the farthest point out. You know, there were some cases where it went beyond that, but not too much beyond that. And there were a couple that went well over a mile, but they were not accepted. So I would say in that range of a half mile, perhaps a little bit more, but we also found that studies that had been evaluated where it went well beyond a mile tended not to, to make it as a final design. And again, if I could just add, it is quite site specific. You know, you may have existing distribution systems in place, steam or thermal distribution or existing electrical distribution, where you wouldn't incur a lot of new incremental costs. But in the main, I would say half mile was pretty much a central tendency or an average number.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Tom, a second question for you. When communities are considering whether microgrids make sense, who all should they include in the early discussions? You know, who should be in that dialogue regarding the feasibility of projects? What other organizations?
Well, I think the ones that, and I'll take the framework of those that are designed for critical infrastructure resiliency. There you would certainly start with some facilities that are critical infrastructure. What are those sites that you want to have up and running, that you want to have this significantly added degree of reliability to go through storms? But I would think that the key players would be, well, the municipality itself, but also we talked about potential anchors like hospitals, college campuses, large public housing facilities, but also bring in, the community stakeholders, business interests. We found some examples of, you may have interest in bringing in a supermarket, pharmacy, but I would be broad-based in terms of bringing in a wide constituency, including critical infrastructure, the municipality, nonprofit and business sectors, as well as other those who are very much interested and involved in energy planning within your community. This should be a significant part of the energy planning process in a community.
Tom, the only thing I would add personally to that list of who should be engaged in those discussions would be the utility, the local utility.
Or yes, the utilities are critical. Yes, well, not to be.
So the utilities should be engaged, and I also think that technology vendors and who are developing these new smart grid, microgrid, combined heat and power technologies should, they have a lot to offer as well in terms of experience elsewhere.
Thank you, Jim. That was it's critical to have the utilities involved. And the developers tend to be very good at helping find good prospective sites.
Okay, this next question is for Mark Torpy. Mark, can you repeat the 5 communities that were included in the cost-benefit analysis?
Absolutely, yeah. Let me go through that again. We had 5 sites. And the way we determine the sites, maybe this would be a little helpful too, is we look through the outage data for Irene, Sandy, and Lee, and really identified those locations in the various counties that really got hit hard, had significant numbers of folks, customers out of service for long periods of time. So we started with that. And then we reached out to the county execs and the state and the county emergency management folks and, sent them a letter and chatted with them to see if they had an interest in working with us on this project. And so the distillation to these 5 sites really was a result of that process. And so we've got 5 sites we're looking at right now. Here we go, New York City, right near the Metropolitan Hospital, which is up on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and a clustering of facilities around that facility. A second in Binghamton, New York, near the Broome County Public Safety Facility. There are a few different, I think there's a nursing home there, and SUNY Broome, State University of New York at Broome, is also in that area. Nassau County, at the Cedar Creek Water Pollution Control Plant, which is the focal point of that activity, and there's a Wantagh Fire Department station and an elementary school that's nearby as well. In Suffolk County, a Yaphank complex. There we're including the Suffolk County Corrections Facility, some fire and rescue, police, sheriff facilities there. And then lastly, number 5, in Rockland County in New City. And there's a clustering of facilities, a county jail, a county office building, a highway garage, and a number of other facilities there. So those are the 5 we're looking at now, and happy to provide, certainly more detail on any of the sites, to anybody in the audience.
Mark, one follow-up question that came in on that is regarding the 5 sites. You mentioned the Cedar Creek plant, Nassau County. One of the questions that came in was there's also a Bay Park sewer treatment plant that was severely damaged by Sandy. Do you know whether there was any consideration to that particular location?
I don't know offhand, but I will certainly talk with the team and find out, if there was any conversation with those folks. And again, that was the Bay Park water plant?
Yes.
Okay, I'll run that down and try to get some information on that, Jim. I don't know off the top of my head, though.
Yeah. Mark, another question that came in regarding NYSERDA. Are incentives available for both new construction design and implementation of combined heat and power?
Yeah, we've got a program here at NYSERDA, as Tom Bourgeois mentioned, that we've been running for an awful long time, probably about 10 years, maybe even a little more than that, Tom, where we do provide funding support incentive levels for combined heat and power projects. And we are technology agnostic, so we will look at supporting, for example, smaller gas turbine systems, reciprocating engine systems. So it's a wide variety of combined heat and power projects that we support. So from the CHP standpoint, we've got a very robust program, had it for a long time. On the microgrid side of things, if you're thinking about tethering that to a microgrid, we do have a smart grid program here at NYSERDA. It's a competitive program, and we have supported a number of microgrid studies to date. We haven't really gone forward with a sort of steel in the ground microgrid project, but we're involved in doing some further detailed studies. One, for example, is at the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus in New York. The other is also, I think, Westchester County. There's a facility that Con Ed has talked to us about. So we've got some funding there for some additional study work as well. So, and I would also be happy to share a link to that smart grid and CHP solicitation to folks on the phone, so that they've got the ability to look directly at the solicitations and see if they've got any if it's going to be helpful for them.
Thanks, Mark. In fact, we can put those solicitations on the Consortium webpage as well, so the listeners could find them there or else at the NYSERDA site. And this is a question that came in for any of the speakers, Tom or Brian or Mark. Have small hydroelectricity sources been considered for microgrids?
Well, I can certainly just give a little bit of information there. I think, Jim, the facility that you have been talking about for quite some time at Clarkson University, they were looking at incorporating some small run-of-river hydro facility up there through an energy procurement that would provide some amount of energy to that campus. So I don't know if they're thinking about exactly matching that with their microgrid project, but the idea certainly of using hydro as an integral generation component of the microgrid, I think, is really a worthwhile thing to pursue if you're in the right proximity.
That's right. In fact, the early thinking at Clarkson regarding a prospective project would include a 2-megawatt hydro facility that's an existing but refurbished hydro facility, 2 megawatts of photovoltaics, and a 2-megawatt biomass facility. So that's an interesting project because it could potentially be 100% renewables supplying the needs of the campus. I don't know, Tom, did you want to add anything on that?
Only to say that I know that there were a couple that were part of the early round in Connecticut as well. So there are certainly examples of that. Clarkson is probably the best, and you guys already touched on that one, but we are seeing in some other states that communities are looking at a small hydro opportunity if it can provide power in close proximity.
Okay, this is a question that came in primarily for Mark. Can you say anything about the potential of working with NYCHA, New York City Housing Authority, any obstacles, but also the potential benefits of NYCHA being involved in such microgrid projects?
Well, yeah, in fact, the New York City project that I mentioned with the Metropolitan Hospital, the main facilities that are sort of clustered around there that we've been talking to that we think makes sense at this point. There's a Verizon telecommunications facility that is obviously providing critical communications infrastructure, but also adjacent to the hospital, NYCHA has a facility there. I believe it's the Washington and Lincoln houses that are there, and so we are looking at trying to link up with NYCHA as part of this project. We're open to sort of any relationships that make sense in terms of providing shelters of refuge, and so we are looking at some of the in this case the multifamily housing complexes to participate as well, and so far the discussions have been really good. I give the city a lot of credit and Con Ed a lot of credit for trying to I think work with these individuals and these facilities and try to find value for the broader public as well. So that's a really great idea, and we are working on that for that project.
One additional question, and this is looking more at smaller scale microgrids, and the terminology that was used here is what about nanogrids or potential funding to link up homes such as in Mastic Beach, where individual homes went for weeks without power. Is there some way that microgrids can be a consideration for these smaller communities, linking up residential customers? For Tom or Mark.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, you want to start, or I can?
Yeah, if you want to start, I'll follow on. But yeah,
okay. I'll just mention that we are looking really at extending the value of microgrids to residential consumers in general. We think that's a really important thing to be able to do. I think the example that I mentioned before with the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus, I think is a fairly interesting one. I mean, they've got a clustering of medical facilities there in that area, but they've also got a couple of neighborhoods that are right adjacent to the property. Allentown, I believe, is one residential neighborhood, and another neighborhood called the Fruit Belt neighborhood. And so we are looking at ways to extend that microgrid to provide some resiliency for those homeowners as well. And, I think, though, having that clustering of, or anchor tenants, if you will, with that facility will make it even a little more cost-effective for those residential interconnections if they participate. So there's some synergistic benefit there by, I think, not just looking at residential only, but, where you've got that opportunity to mix commercial and residential, I think will be your best economic play. But, gosh, the residential, applications are very, very important, and we're trying, and certainly for this NYPrize competition that I mentioned before, that will be a very, very important consideration in our analysis.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add except referring back to that graph I showed, and Mark just reinforced that point. You know, it's important to look at a mix. If you have a good simultaneity between the electric and thermal demands, which might be a mix of different customers, that could well include the single-family residential, and that would be made much more cost-effective, I believe, and I think Mark indicated, if you have some other larger anchor tenant and you can pool these different loads that work well together.
Okay, thank you. The last question from the audience is really a segue into the conclusion of the webinar, and that's, we were asked, will the slides be available for those who are not here today? And the answer is yes. We hope within a few days we will have the entire presentation up on the web page, and it'll also be, you'll be able to listen to the entire presentation, not only see the slides. With that, I'd like to just thank everyone who spoke, all the participants, Tom, Mark, Carol, Brian, and also all of you who listened in on this webinar. And I'm putting up on the screen the contact information of everyone who presented, as well as the websites for the various organizations. And again, the various websites will be continuously updated with new information as it becomes available, and as we think it would be of value to all of you. With that, I'd like to conclude and thank you for listening in to this webinar.